Welcome to Ceasefire, where civics meet civility and engagement meets empowerment. Ceasefire is hosted by former Boerne ISD trustee and owner of the Boerne Bookshop, Dale Adams, and by former Boerne City Council member and local insurance agent, Ron Cisneros. Ready, aim, ceasefire.
Good morning, Kendall County. This is Dale Adams.
And I'm Ron Cisneros.
And this is Ceasefire. And today we are talking about loopholes in government.
Yes, sir.
Governance. What kind of loopholes are we talking about?
Oh, all kinds. You know, we're talking about real simple things like people finding ways to get around local government codes and people finding ways to get around past federal tax laws and why they do things like that. Why do people park in handicap parking?
You know, that's really interesting because to think of the government as a system of loopholes to seek out. Mm-hmm. And I think we all do that. We don't do that with our morals, though, which shows the difference between laws and morals. Right. I had this discussion with my wife the other day, and she's like, well, they're related. They're sort of the same. I think we should follow laws, and so that's my moral code. But it's interesting that you talk about loopholes in laws, but there aren't loopholes in morals. So there shouldn't be, I should say.
I think that, this might bring out a philosophical question here. Do we look for loopholes in our rules, in our God-given rules? Are we looking for ways to get around it?
Not really. I don't think I do. I try not to. I don't think most people do. Maybe in certain circumstances they're trying to say, "Oh, I really want that," or want to do that, and they do it. But that's not really a loophole. That's sort of like, okay, I'm going to violate it this one time kind of thing. Whereas laws, we're always looking for loopholes.
Yeah.
It's yellow. It's still yellow. It won't turn red till after I'm actually through the light. That's a loophole.
Yeah.
You know? I mean,
yeah. Or the talking about driving violations. I think all of us have grown up hearing this idea that if your speed is within 7 miles of the speed
10.
limit, then you're okay. You won't get pulled over. And so, 65 or 75 becomes a suggestion. And so, well, I can really do 82.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna. We'll stop that one. Well, this conversation actually got started several days ago when we were talking about handicap parking spots and the loopholes people use to use them. Mm-hmm. And I actually did a little bit of research this, and I found a study, and this actually was done in 2002, and it's just a university thesis, so take it with a grain of salt. But apparently, in cities and urban environments, 75% of people parking in handicapped parking lots are doing so illegally. And in smaller towns, we're much better. It's only 50%. Wow. And I couldn't believe that. Now, this is an older statistic, but it doesn't surprise me because I know a lot of people do that. Mm-hmm. And this gets back to the sort of legal moral thing. Are they doing it because they're looking for a loophole because it's a law situation? If it was a moral choice, would that statistic be lower? I don't know.
Yeah,
I think so. But.
Well, so this makes me think. I always think about this. Are people? Is it like a game for some people? Right? Is this? Can I game the system? So when Home Depot or other businesses put up a sign. And we reserve this for Purple Heart recipients, or we reserve this for women who are expecting, right? I think for the most part, and there's no law. This is just Home Depot saying this is reserved for Purple Heart. Yeah. Right. And most of the time when you walk past that spot, there's a truck there, and they've got the Purple Heart plates, and you're like, okay. So people are being obedient, and there's no law telling them to do that. They're just respectful of the business's wishes, right?
And I think that brings up that it's a moral choice.
Right.
Whereas when you have a law about it, it becomes a legal choice, and you start looking for loopholes.
Right. Yeah, and I think all of us at some point have met someone who, they borrowed grandma's car and they went to H-E-B and they had the placard hanging there. So, hey, I'm going to go ahead and park there. And as wrong as we might think that is, right? We know a lot of people who have done it. I want you to know, for the record, I've never done that.
I don't do that.
Well, I've never had anybody in my family who had that little placard. So
yeah, I actually park in the last parking spot.
Well, I do too.
So I get a nice walk.
I do that as well, and I like to avoid door dings too.
Yes, getting someplace nice and open. Yeah.
But so there are folks who do that, and that's a government regulation, and the government actually mandates that H-E-B or Home Depot have to set aside a certain amount of parking spaces. And I know that they probably have some research somewhere that tells them that you need to do a certain percentage. I never know if that's a national percentage and then they just bring that down to the local level, or if they actually do an accounting. I doubt that they do, but
it's a law.
Yeah.
There's a law about it. How many spots you have to have per all your spots.
But it's not based on a local census of the number of people with disabilities in Kendall County, for example, right?
Not at all.
Because I think you go to some larger businesses and you see the number of spots, and it's like there can't be that many, right? And then you hear stories about the VA handing out disabilities, right?
Yeah.
Like they're
candy,
like it's candy, right? And assigning a percentage of disability to a person, which automatically gets them that placard, just about, and then you start to question the fairness of everything.
Right.
And at that point, you're
like, I don't care. I'm going to game it.
Right. And then the whole law seems illegitimate.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. It undermines the legitimacy and the credibility of the concept.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think some of the loophole behavior, too, comes from bad incentives. Right. So government incentivizes things to get a certain result. And so we seek out these loopholes to gain advantages,
right?
That you probably wouldn't even pursue were it not for the government's intervention in the process.
Yes.
Right.
An interesting thing in this study that I talked about earlier is that most of the violators were elderly people who maybe, should be parking closer, but they hadn't gone through the process, but they sort of felt, well, I'm justified.
Really?
So I thought that was interesting, that if this was a moral situation, they still would probably use that spot, but they wouldn't have to game the system to do it.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was interesting. My wife is a doctor, and when she did a residency, she did an internal medicine rotation, and she got asked every single day by somebody for her to write her up for a placard. They were always asking her to write up for placards for all kinds of reasons. She even had somebody who would tell her, oh, I'm doing really great now. I walk 2 miles a day, and I do this and that's. And, oh, by the way, can you get me a handicap placard? Because, it'd be really nice to be able to park close to the store because, it's a long ways through that parking lot. She's like, you just told me you walk 2 miles a day.
Oh, my gosh.
And so she'd get that all the time. Now, interesting thing is she was at BAMC. And, of course, that's military, so everybody knows what's going on. The general in charge of the hospital, his office actually oversees the parking lot, and they have a lot of handicap parking lot there. And he would actually sit there and watch when he had his off moments. And if he saw somebody get out there and park their car and walk in, and obviously not handicapped, he would look up the license plate number, contact the commander of whoever owned that car, and then issue a note down to that commander to reprimand that person. So it might have been that person's son or daughter or something, but that enlisted person or that officer would get a bit of a hand slap, an embarrassment, very embarrassing hand slap about somebody parking in handicap parking. So I thought it was kind of cool. I don't know if it really worked.
Yeah.
But he had his own method to deal with the issue.
Now here is what the counter argument that some might throw out to that, and that is that, some disabilities are internal. You can't really see them, right?
True.
Which brings me to another common bending of rules and regulations, and that's the dogs for
therapy dogs.
Therapy dogs,
yeah,
correct,
yeah,
right. Yeah. And so there are some dogs that have been trained, and you can take them into a restaurant, and they're going to sit next to the owner, and they're not going to move. And then there are the the emotional support animals, right? Somebody trying to take their beloved dog with them into HEB or into a restaurant where they shouldn't, right? Yeah. And they're claiming a need when there's truly not a need. There's just probably a severe emotional attachment to the animal.
That's really comparable to the parking situation, because that's another place where the government has created a special category for people, and so people are trying to game it.
Right.
And they come up with their own categories and their own reasons for needing to have a person or an animal follow them around all the time.
Yeah.
I think that's fascinating. Very comparable, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's it's frustrating because at the heart of the law, you want people to have those animals for assistance, right? The people that are in legitimate need, but you see the abuse you see the toy poodle in a woman's handbag in her cart at HEB. It's like that wasn't the idea. That wasn't, and so does government create a problem? Should they have just stayed out of it and leave the policy to HEB, leave the policy to Home Depot? You decide for yourselves.
I think so, because I think they take the decision away from the moral sphere and put it into the legal sphere, which is where we have our gaming things. Now, we'll get back with that right now. We're going to take a quick break. This is Ceasefire with Dale and Ron. See you in a minute. Boerne has its own bookshop. In fact, it's called the Boerne Bookshop. Hi, I'm Dale Adams, inviting you to get lost. Get lost in a good book in our relaxed and casual atmosphere. We have a wide and eclectic selection in the Boerne Bookshop, and we pride ourselves on finding what you are looking for. We do author meet and greets, host writing workshops, and can connect you with a good book club. And your young ones will absolutely love our kids section at the Boerne Bookshop. And while we want you to get lost, we're easy to find, as we're in the heart of Boerne, at the back of the Richter Tavern building. We are the Boerne Bookshop. Welcome back. This is Ceasefire with Dale and Ron, and we're talking about, I finished off with the difference between the moral and legal aspects of making choices, and how when governments make a law about something, suddenly we start to think about gaming the system. But we don't really game our morals, and maybe making laws about things doesn't help the situation.
Right. Interesting comparison to what we were just talking about before the break, and this is in the airline industry, and this one isn't a federal law, but the process that airlines use to board people. And Southwest is notorious for people who board on wheelchairs and have a meeting with Jesus somewhere 30,000 feet in the air and are healed miraculously.
I think you read the same thing I did. That was hilarious.
Yeah, and then they get off the plane and they walk out on their own 2 feet. They have figured out a way to game the system and get ahead. Yeah. I don't know if I haven't been on a Southwest plane since they've changed their boarding system, so I don't know if that's helped in any way. But
no, apparently that's a big problem all across all airlines now, all over the place.
Yeah. And I think and American just did something a little different from United, where they have where they are prioritizing their real first class and business travelers over the people that have a lot of mileage in so that they're creating uniqueness in these divisions, and some people don't like that and they want to get on the plane sooner. Everybody wants to be first on the plane. I get that. Get their but the airlines are figuring that out without government intervention. They're figuring out which process works better. Right. I wouldn't advocate for a federal law to figure out who gets on the plane first, because it's not going to change anything. If anything, it'll make it worse.
Because everybody will have something marked on their ID or something like that.
Right.
Everybody will go to their doctor to get them to mark it on their driver's license that they can get on the plane first.
And we've actually talked about this idea before on a previous show about the number of laws that we have. I think there's a study that indicates that we break up to 7 laws a week because we're so unaware of how many regulations and you have federal laws, state laws, city laws, county laws, your HOA requirements, right? It's never ending.
Yeah.
And so adding another layer of complexity doesn't solve anything. Maybe the idea is to go back to that idea of letting Home Depot decide, hey, we're going to set aside a parking spot for a Purple Heart recipient or an expectant mother.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I'm going to add something a little hyper-local here.
Okay.
Parking right here around the Richter studio has undergone some changes in the last year or so. We got ourselves a paid parking lot.
Mm-hmm.
And I talked to the owner once, and he said, visitors tend to pay. Locals tend not so much. And maybe that's because they are assuming that they have a right there because they've always parked there.
Right.
But the interesting thing is when that happened, then the neighboring building put in signs saying only our people can park here.
Right.
And then the county put in a fence and a sign saying nobody park here.
Right.
And this desire to protect your ownership of these parking spots spreads. And when the county did it, I just said that's just I couldn't come up with a word, and so I just said that's just not neighborly. And it just made me so mad when they did that. And it's still a bee in my bonnet. I can't. It drives me nuts that there's the fence there that serves absolutely no purpose except to inconvenience somebody that might want to park in their parking lot.
Right. So. Well, that's another radio show.
But that's my okay.
So I office on the other side of that parking lot on the second floor. And we have those spots reserved for us. And as you well know, I get up super early. And so I'll get here some mornings, at 7, looking for a spot. And they're all taken by people who are parked on our side of the parking lot.
It's non-pay.
So they can go to the grill, right? And so they don't have to pay.
Or jog. People come in really early and jog.
Oh, my gosh,
yeah.
And then it drives me crazy because they'll occupy one of the several spots that I like to park in.
Yeah.
But I get it, too. It's before 8 a.m., so they think, well, who's going to be here?
Right.
So, and I don't know that we have solved the parking problem downtown. It's interesting because I think our initial reaction is, well, city, do something, county, do something. And I think that invites the problem in.
I think so, too. I actually think that there's plenty of parking downtown, except for maybe Dickens on Main. It's just in parades. It's just that they're all segregated and cordoned off from each other. And if the parking spot owners were more neighborly, I don't think it'd be much of an issue if it could be sort of more integrated. That's just my personal.
I actually think you're right. When I was on city council, we did 2 or 3 times while I was on council, they did parking studies, and they found that there was actually for day-to-day operations, not counting the parades and things that you mentioned, that we had more than enough parking. The problem from the business owner's perspective is that if you had a store that had a particular item that wasn't necessarily geared towards the tourists, it wasn't easy to park, go into the store, get the one item, and go. Our parking was really better suited for the people that come in from San Antonio or Austin or wherever, and then they park somewhere and then they walk up and down Main Street.
Right.
I get that argument, but if you use that argument to justify a very expensive parking garage or to, again, then you start to invite government in. And I think that always creates more of the thing that we're trying to avoid, which is the regulation and then the gaming and of the system and the loopholes.
Yeah. That and I've got a book along those lines too, and I've probably brought this book up before, so this is a twofer for some of you guys. It's called Overruled: The Human Toll of Too Much Law by Justice Neil Gorsuch, and I like him because he makes everybody mad. Because he rules against everybody at some point or another. Because he doesn't believe that there needs to be a law for every single thing. And his book talks about that. It says you start having a problem when you've got too many laws. And I think part of the problem is the moral aspect, that you start gaming everything you do if there's a law about everything you do. Whereas if you leave it to the morals and the citizenship aspect and the chivalry aspect of our personalities, then it'll be better.
Yeah. We talked about local people bending the rules, but I think oftentimes when we're sitting on a recliner and we're watching the television, we think it's the big corporate fat cats that are bending the rules, right?
Yeah.
So we think about big corporations and how they have teams of lawyers and teams of public image people that can help them break rules, right? And we don't think about ourselves in that picture.
Yeah, and it's important to note that they don't hire lawyers, and they're not big in fat cats and whatnot to break the rules. They're the ones that make the rules, and they make them with these loopholes, and then they can game the system.
Mm-hmm.
And they're not breaking anything. It's because the laws aren't made to really encompass all the possible situations, and so they manage things so that they fit into the situations where they can do whatever they want, which is fine. But as individuals, we don't know that much.
Right.
We don't know all the laws that detailed.
Yeah, and it's interesting. As individuals, when we hire an attorney, we hire somebody who is creative and will find a way to bend the law to get us the answer that we want. Right. And so then, but as consumers or as individuals, we castigate these people. This is terrible what they're doing. And it's like, well, but they're doing what you want them to do. If you were in need of their service, this is exactly how you want them to behave.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And as business owners, so I work with business owners all day long. I'm essentially in that role of helping them get past all of the Obamacare legislation, right?
To get the coverage they want.
Right. And some of my business owners, on their own, because they believe in taking care of their employees, will go and provide benefits without the government cajoling them and saying, you have to do this, right?
Yeah.
When the government stepped in 2010 and said, okay, if you've got 50 or more full-time employees, you have to do this, our entire industry shifted to find ways to meet that.
To game the system.
To game the system and meet the bare essentials. And what they discovered was that Obama's definition of minimum essential coverage was nothing more than an annual wellness visit. And so the industry developed these plans called minimum essential coverage plans, which provided just that, a free annual wellness visit, and it did nothing more than that. Now, some of these plans have gotten a little broader, and they've added things in like 24/7 teledoc services and whatnot. But an employer can now avoid the first penalty for not providing coverage, which is a little over $2,000, by simply offering, and he only has to offer a plan that's about $60 a month. It doesn't even have to, it doesn't even have to have any takers. He just has to offer it. And the second penalty, which is a penalty for the coverage not being affordable, can be avoided by offering this plan that costs $60 a month. And now he walks away from the penalties, and nobody has any insurance. It's not what people believe they're getting. Right. So what people want is coverage for everything. They go to the doctor, they pay $20, right?
But especially when they break a leg or get cancer.
Right.
That's really what people want.
Right. But they don't want to pay for it.
Right.
They want the employer to pay for it. The government wants the employer to pay for it, but the employer can't afford to provide coverage. Not at $600-700 a month per person. Yeah. It's just not affordable. And so we've created the system where small business owners are trying to find the end arounds, the loopholes, and I'm in the position where I have to help them.
Right. So the employers are now not focused on, I think I'll give my employees health care. Now they're focused on, how can I game the system?
Right.
So when the government comes in and makes a law about something that we all think is a great idea, by it suddenly becoming a law, it totally changes the incentives and the direction and the focus of those involved.
Right. Now imagine if we get the government out of the healthcare business, or out of telling the employer to provide healthcare, and if we get them out of all the other regulations that they're involved in with these businesses, and the businesses have to compete. If GM had to compete with Ford directly, right?
Yeah.
And for employees, for workforce, and they didn't have all of the other regulations on them, GM would have to get competitive in pay in order to take Ford's employees.
Yeah.
And Ford would have to do the same.
Yeah.
And eventually they'd say, well, we can't keep outpaying each other. What else can we do? Well, let's get to employee benefits. That's another way to retain key employees. That's how we even got
That's
into
how it
the
started.
group health. Yeah.
Yes, they were competing.
Yes.
Yeah.
In competing for workforce.
Yeah.
And all of that without government regulation.
Yeah. And then government regulation comes in.
Yep.
Yeah. So parking laws to health care to every other little thing we get a law about that seems like a good idea initially disrupts and distorts the market. So what's the solution? I mean, the problem is once you create a set of laws about something, people get the mindset that they can game it. And so if we suddenly said, oh, there's no more laws about handicap parking, that mindset of gaming handicap parking might still exist for a little while.
For a while, but I think eventually, like the example I gave with GM and Ford, that eventually people will gravitate towards the right thing because of competition or because of goodwill, like the Purple Heart parking space. That creates goodwill in the community, and Home Depot doesn't want to be seen as anti-vet, right? So I think people do that out of natural goodwill. Right.
Trusting the people.
Right.
Wow, what a concept.
There you go.
Okay, with that, we are going to trust that you listen to our next show, too. But that wraps it up for this show, and if you missed any of it, you can always go to BoerneRadio.com and listen to our podcast, finish up this show, or listen to the other shows, and we will see you next week.